thing.
He was friends with my roommate, but we didn't know each other.
Yeah, he was friends with her roommate, but they didn't know each other, and he lived in the dorm next to us. It's all very strange. But anyway, here you go. Todd.
Yes. Thank you, Bruce. Yep. Alrighty, so, okay. And don't forget, you can also purchase DVDs of the talks here from Ted, who does a wonderful job for us in recruiting this stuff. Well, so there you go. And without further ado, Michael Ossman will be talking to you about Bluetooth keyboards. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Todd. Can you guys hear me? Excellent. I can hear you too, some of you. It's really a pleasure to be here for ShmooCon VI. Suck it, Emacs. I'm Mike, and I work at the Institute for Telecommunication Sciences at the United States Department of Commerce Boulder Labs in Colorado. And ITS was really cool, and they sent me here, and we do telecommunication research and engineering services for various government agencies. But this work that I'm presenting today is my own. If I say something stupid, when I say something stupid, don't blame the government. I'm here to talk about Bluetooth keyboards, and in particular, devices that follow the Bluetooth HID profile, the Human Interface Device Profile. That was published in 2003. And I'm talking about devices that are following the Bluetooth core specification version 1.2. That might sound a little old to you. Some of you may have heard a few weeks ago that Bluetooth 4.0 was released. But the reason I'm looking at 1.2 is because that's what keyboards use. Keyboards don't use Bluetooth Low Energy that was specified in 4.0. They don't use alternative MAC-PHY 802.11 that was in 3.0. They don't use Simple Secure Pairing that was in 2.1. They don't use Enhanced Data Rate that was 2.0. You have to go back to version 1.2 to find new features of Bluetooth that are actually used by Bluetooth keyboards that are on the market. Incidentally, something else that was published in 2003 is a particular article in an issue of Cryptogram. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Cryptogram, that newsletter that's written by the other Bruce. In 2003, he wrote a little short article on the importance of authentication. And it was kind of saying, basically, encryption's great and all, but if you don't verify who's on the other end of the line, it's kind of pointless, right? So I want to read you a little excerpt. Oh, and it would be nice if I had this out and ready for you, wouldn't it? From this February 2003 issue. Last year, I had a conversation with an engineer involved with security for the Bluetooth wireless protocol. I told him that Bluetooth has only privacy and not per-packet authentication. He responded with the prototypical lame responses. 1, pseudo-random frequency hopping makes it nearly impossible for an attacker to get in. And 2, the range is only 8 feet, so the attacks are naturally limited. I tried to argue the point, but eventually gave up. Then I said something like, I can hardly wait for Bluetooth to become universal because I really want a wireless keyboard and mouse with a base station built into my computer. He said, yes, but you really probably don't want to use Bluetooth for that because then somebody could stuff keystrokes or mouse clicks into your system. Is it really that bad? Can anybody in the parking lot sniff your keystrokes, stuff keystrokes into your PC? The answer is a little bit complicated, and that's why I'm here today. Bluetooth keyboards are generally battery powered, and most of them have a power switch. I have seen keyboards that don't have a power switch. I've seen a keyboard that has a power button for a PC, but doesn't actually have a switch to turn itself off and on. Bluetooth keyboards, most of them have a connect button that puts the keyboard into discoverable mode and allows a host to connect to it and initiate that communication. Bluetooth keyboards generally have some kind of indicator, like an LED light, or sometimes even a whole LCD display. And that tells you something about what it's doing. Usually, at the very least, they have some kind of indicator to tell you that they're in discoverable mode. Oftentimes, Bluetooth keyboards have their BD8EDR, the Bluetooth device address, printed somewhere on them or on a sticker or something like that, which is really convenient if you're trying to connect to these things. One particular interesting thing, the Bluetooth keyboards, most of them ship with a host adapter in the form of a dongle, USB dongle. And it's just the same as any other USB dongle you would buy, except that it also has that little connect button on it. And so the idea is you push the connect button on your keyboard, you put your connect button on your dongle, they find each other, and everything starts to work. And that process of connecting to each other is establishing what's called a virtual cable. But realize that virtual cabling is different than pairing. You might be familiar with pairing from other Bluetooth devices that you've used, where it uses some kind of a pin. And the result of pairing is a link key, which is a shared secret between the two devices that can then be used for authentication and encryption down the road. Many times when you virtually cable to HID devices, or a device in a host, many times you are pairing and virtually cabling at the same time, but not necessarily. The virtual cable concept is that your keyboard is plugged into a computer, a one-to-one correspondence. It's only plugged into one at a time is the idea, right? Just like it would be if you plugged it in with a cable. But it's a different construct than pairing. The HID profile, the Bluetooth HID profile, basically it's pretty short. It's only about a 100-page specification compared to about 2,000 for the core specification for Bluetooth. And basically it says what we do is we take USB HID and run it over Bluetooth. So the USB guys have figured out this human interface device stuff. We're just going to take their protocol and run it on top of Bluetooth. And one thing that stood out to me in particular is that encryption support is required for keyboards. It says that right there in the Bluetooth HID profile. And it also says that encryption support is not required for a mouse or for most other HID devices. And keyboards only have to support encryption. They don't actually have to use it all the time. Nowhere in the specification does it say keystrokes shall be encrypted. The HID protocol is in the form of short frames called reports. And an HID report is carried in an L2 cap frame, which is one of the Bluetooth suite protocols. And that runs over HCI, the host controller interface between a host and a host adapter, like a dongle. And that same HID report carried in the same L2 cap frame is carried over the baseband, what's called the baseband interface, which is the air interface between a dongle and a device. So if we're wanting to explore these systems, we kind of have two different approaches or two different avenues that we can take. One is the HCI layer and the other is the baseband layer. And the tools that I'm going to be talking about today kind of fit into two categories. Some of them are HCI layer tools that are based on the BlueZ Linux Bluetooth stack. And the other are baseband tools using the GR Bluetooth project, GNU Radio, and the USRP from Edis Research. And as many of you know, I'm a developer on the GR Bluetooth project, so I've been doing a lot of work on that. But for this talk, I really have focused a lot on what can be done with off-the-shelf dongles and a $10 part and open source software on the left. I'm really interested in what can an attacker do with those really affordable tools, and I'm also really interested in what can a defender do with those very affordable tools. I mean, maybe you assume that your attacker has a USRP or even more sophisticated hardware, but if you're a defender and you're on a budget, wouldn't it be nice to be able to use the more affordable tools to assess your own systems and figure out where your weaknesses are? The HID protocol basically has two flavors. One's called boot protocol, and the other is report protocol. And this comes from the USB HID spec, okay, so for wired keyboards. The report protocol is the thing that all keyboards are required to support, and all HID devices are required to support. It's a very flexible protocol where the HID device provides some kind of a descriptor to the host that tells the host how to parse their messages. So it's a very flexible and complicated parser. So typically it's only implemented in a very full stack implementation on the host side. But when they were first coming up with HID for USB, they said, well, what about a BIOS of a PC? How are we going to boot up? Are we going to expect that BIOS vendors are going to have a complete USB stack? Probably not. So what they did was they came up with this boot protocol, which has these fixed reports, not flexible reports. And there are fixed reports defined for keyboards, simple keyboards and 2-axis mice, and that's it. Any variation on that requires report protocol. But boot protocol is a fixed reporting mechanism to be used, that is used between keyboards and a BIOS. It can be used by the operating system once you boot up, optionally. These are both defined in the HID specification with the idea that boot protocol is available for BIOSes to use. Bluetooth specifies something called boot mode, which is an extension of this idea. When you're in boot mode, when a device is in boot mode, or in particular when a dongle is in boot mode talking to a device, it's using the boot protocol to talk to the device, and it's also probably using USB emulation. So what it does is it tells the host computer, hey, I'm a USB keyboard. It doesn't tell it, I'm a Bluetooth adapter. It doesn't tell it anything about there being Bluetooth connected to the system. It's just saying, I'm a USB keyboard and a USB mouse, in the case of this one, because it's a little dongle that ships with both the keyboard and a mouse. It just basically fools the system, and that allows a boot time. A BIOS doesn't have to have any kind of knowledge of Bluetooth whatsoever. I'm going to show you just a real quick demo here. If I look at my USB bus, you'll see the devices I have on it. I'm going to pop in this little dongle that came with the keyboard and look at my bus again. And there you see those top 3 lines are the dongle. It's actually enumerated itself as 3 devices. It's enumerated itself as a keyboard, as a mouse, and as a dongle. And if I do an HCI config, you'll see I have no HCI Bluetooth devices at all. But if I use the HID to HCI utility that comes with BlueZ, I can switch the thing over to HCI mode, and then you can see, oh, now I have a Bluetooth device attached, right? So unless the user or the host operating system makes the effort to put the thing into HCI mode, it's always going to default to boot mode where it's doing USB emulation. And this happens a lot. You put the dongle into the computer, and let's say, for example, you put it into a computer that doesn't have a Bluetooth stack, or it has a Bluetooth stack, but it doesn't actually support the HID profile. And there's a very famous stack that doesn't support the HID profile, and that's the one that ships with Windows XP. So if you plug this thing into a Windows XP computer and you never install the third-party stack that probably came on a CD with your keyboard, then you're probably running this thing in boot mode all the time. So I was playing with this particular one last year as I was working on the GR Bluetooth project, and I captured a waveform of this keyboard, and here's a spectrogram of it, and then I was working on this Wireshark Bluetooth baseband plugin, which is now a part of the GR Bluetooth project. So it's this plugin for Wireshark that dissects baseband. And by the way, Dominic Spill, who is unable to be here today, did put out a new release of GR Bluetooth this morning. So some fresh codes out there for you all. The interesting thing I noted is this is actually the capture I was using when I was developing this, and I was going down through the packet one field at a time, and I'm getting closer and closer to this payload at the bottom, and I'm going, oh my goodness, there isn't very much entropy there. Realized that this was taken with a USRP and entirely passive monitoring, with no knowledge of the device's addresses, no knowledge of any link keys, just completely blind passive monitoring. And here I get to the bottom, and I have a completely clear text HID report. And this is a boot mode report And you can see in the middle of that string of mostly zeros, there's the character 1C, and that's the particular letter that was typed. That represents, that 1 byte represents the particular letter that was typed on the keyboard. And so I was talking to Josh Wright about this last year, and he said, "Wow, that's great. I can't believe that nobody's done this before. We should have a tool that allows us to actually pull these keystrokes out of these captured files." And he said, "Tell you what, you send me some captures, and I'll write the tool." And I said, "Are you kidding me? Of course I'll send you some captures." And thus BTapTap was born. With this tool, all you do is just point it at a PCAP file, which is the file that's produced by GR Bluetooth and what we're dissecting in Wireshark, and it just pulls the keystrokes out. And this is also in the GR Bluetooth tree. So realize that this particular situation, we're in boot mode. Now, not all dongles and keyboards are going to end up communicating in the clear in boot mode, but many do. How do you test that? How do you know whether your keyboard's actually using encryption or not? And I'll be talking about that later. But one way you can do with the more expensive hardware is to use the GR Bluetooth, just like I just shown. But I'm going to show how to use off-the-shelf dongles to learn the same kind of thing. So be careful of boot mode. Boot mode is not going to behave the same way as normal HCI mode. You're losing your control that your host operating system has over your Bluetooth device by operating in boot mode. You might be able to avoid boot mode entirely. Like if you replace your dongle with a regular dongle that doesn't have a connect button, it probably won't support boot mode. And your keyboard will only work when your host operating system is booted up. That might work for you in some situations. Although I warn you, more and more Bluetooth host adapters, including some that ship internally in laptops, actually default to boot mode. So they start out, even if you never configure them or never install any Bluetooth software, you might have a laptop that is just waiting for a keyboard to connect to it at any time. So look out for those. One of the things that we could do if we have just plain off-the-shelf dongles and HCI layer tools is to try connecting to a device directly. That means connecting to the keyboard. And you can initiate a connection to that keyboard if you have its address. You can initiate a connection to the keyboard while spoofing the host's address if you also have the host address. And if you also have a third thing, the link key that's shared between the host and the device, then you can really do a good job of spoofing even the authentication and participate in authentication and encryption with that keyboard, just like you're the legitimate host. So those are sort of three things that might be nice to find. And we can initiate an active connection to a keyboard, or we can just listen. We can just set things up so that we're pretending to be the host and waiting for the keyboard to come talk to us. In most situations, I like to initiate an outgoing connection. It gives you more control over what's going on. But there are situations where a keyboard might be more inclined to talk to you, and it isn't always clear which is the keyboard is expecting. We can do the exact same things connecting to a host, potentially pretending to be the device, pretending to be the keyboard. And just that was done some years ago by Colin Mulliner. Some of you may have seen his hit attack and this XKBD BTHID, which is a little on-screen keyboard that he wrote for his little mobile device so that he could pretend to be a Bluetooth keyboard and control other things. And he was interested in finding stacks, host operating systems that had a vulnerability where they were just waiting for a keyboard to connect. And I believe those, other than boot mode dongles, I believe those holes have all been closed to my knowledge, but I don't know if anyone's done a real comprehensive survey. But these tools can also be used to spoof a real device. And I'm going to show you a quick little demo In this case, I'm not using, I'm gonna switch my projector here over to my victim machine. And what I'm going to use is a little tool that is similar to HID attack, hit attack. I'm going to plug in this dongle into this Mac because I'm going to really be attacking the dongle. And the dongle's from vendor A. I'm going to use a mouse from vendor B. Interoperability tends to be very good with these devices. Hey, there we go. We're already connected. And I can bring up this document with my mouse. But these devices tend to, they have power switches. Sometimes they get switched off. Or sometimes, in the case of a keyboard, it's pretty typical. If somebody has a keyboard on a desktop, it's pretty typical that they never turn their keyboard off, but they occasionally turn their computer off. Right? So there are often these windows of opportunity where, I've been using my Bluetooth mouse and I turn it off, but I still have a host sitting there waiting to reconnect to it. So I'm just going to run a little attack. I need another dongle to do this. And I'm just going to use a plain dongle and see if I can pretend to be the mouse and spoof some input events into the victim system over there. And so I'm reconfiguring oh, here we go. Hey. Okay. So I was, it turns out that you can not only spoof input events into when you're pretending to be a mouse, but you can even spoof keyboard events, okay? Because they're just HID reports, right? And it may be that a host operating system stack filters things out and is smart enough to know that keystrokes shouldn't come from a mouse. But but that's not necessarily the case. And in the case of this dongle, which is in boot mode, it's actually enumerated already to the host as a USB mouse and a USB keyboard. So the host thought there was a keyboard attached all along, right? So what I'm really attacking here is the dongle and its inability to know that keystrokes shouldn't come from a mouse. Note that I'm doing this with knowledge of both the host and device addresses, but not with any knowledge of a link key. Remember that mice aren't even required to support encryption by the Bluetooth HID profile specification. Actually, hosts aren't required to support encryption either, which seems a little silly. But every host that I've seen does support encryption. So I'm going to pop back over to my other machine here for the duration. Yay! It worked. Okay. So once again, beware the boot mode, and also. If you're interested in using these kinds of devices in the most secure manner you can, it's a good idea to check and make sure that your devices actually authenticate each other. They can. They maybe should, but the profile doesn't actually say they absolutely must. So there's nothing broken about this particular mouse and dongle. They're following the HID specification. It's just kind of loose on this point. It allows these devices to create a link key or not. It allows them to use that link key to authenticate each other or not. And there really isn't any way to tell whether your device is getting authenticated unless you do some of these tests. So how do you get the device address that you need in order to try one of these attacks? One easy way is physical inspection. If you can find that sticker, you're golden. Another way is passive monitoring using GR Bluetooth. Another way is inquiry. And inquiry is the process of finding discoverable devices. So if you just go to any Bluetooth device, like my phone, and I go to the Bluetooth menu and I say, like, find nearby devices, what I'm doing is an inquiry. And the HCI tool inc command allows you to do an inquiry from the command line. Another way to get addresses is by inspecting the operating system of the host computer. Mike Kershaw has recently released a Kismet BT Scan plugin, which is a plugin that does inquiry from within Kismet. So all you need is a plain, cheap dongle, plug it into your laptop, run Kismet with the BT Scan plugin, which is included in the most recent release of Kismet, and it finds discoverable Bluetooth devices. So this is kind of a convenient tool. And we had tools that did inquiries before, but this one is integrated with Kismet and integrated with all the GPS tracking and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's a really handy tool. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have used the word scan on this slide because the Bluetooth specification uses the term inquiry scan to mean listening for inquiries, not sending inquiries. But it is sending inquiries to locate devices and get their addresses and names and classes. Also, I've been working on, with Mike's help, the Kismet Bluetooth plugin, which is a second plugin for Kismet that is for integration with GR Bluetooth and the USRP. So I'm going to do a real quick demo of that. This does passive monitoring, so you don't need to know any prior knowledge about a device at all, and it doesn't need to be in discoverable mode in order for you to find it. Let me see if this works. This will be the very first field test of the Kismet Bluetooth plugin. Aren't you excited, Mike? Let's see. It probably won't work the first time, and I don't really know why. Okay, the USRP is on. That's good. Hey, there we go. Okay, so you can see I've got 3 different piconets being monitored here already. One of them I've heard of. So whoever else is running Bluetooth in the room, I don't know, let's see if we can point the antenna around. Can we get anybody? No? Anyone? Oh, there are a couple. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's our first field test of the Kismet Bluetooth plugin. It's very crude. All it does, hey! All it does is count up packets that it's seen from these different addresses. And if you saw my talk last year, you know there are ways to improve on this and fill in the upper half of the device addresses. But really, all you need is that lower half in order to initiate some communications with these devices. So let me kill this since it's sucking up 100% of my CPU. And I have a little USRP overrun problem to deal with. So those are some ways that you can use to get these device addresses. And if you're a defender and you are trying to assess your own devices, then it's really easy to get these addresses because you can just inspect them or put them into discovery mode and do an inquiry, and you're good. How do you get a link key is a little bit harder. But again, if you're a defender, you have the advantage because you can just go into an operating system and wherever that OS stores its link keys, like the BlueZ stack stores them in their varlib Bluetooth, and Mac OS stores them in the whatever you call those profiles. If you do a defaults command, you can list out your link keys. And so for some, I think my next demo, I'm going to actually be using a link key that I've extracted from a host computer using that technique to test something. But an attacker can potentially get a link key using passive monitoring and cracking a pairing, for example, to determine a link key. And that's a well-known attack that's been around for a while. It's a little hard to execute in practice, but it can be done. And I've done it with the USRP. So it's something that you should probably consider that an attacker would be able to do. Well, if you can connect to a device and pretend to be a host, and if you can connect to a host and pretend to be a device, then the natural thing to try is a man in the middle, right? So I put together this little tool called BTHID proxy. And this is using plain off-the-shelf dongles and the BlueZ stack on Linux. And what it does is it configures one dongle to act like the device and one dongle to act like the host and sticks itself into the middle. Thanks to the virtual cabling concept, it's usually not possible to initiate a second connection to one of these devices. So an attacker using this kind of tool, or a defender using this kind of tool to assess their devices, would have to wait for an opportunity, like when the user turns off the mouse, or turns off the keyboard, or turns off the host computer and leaves the keyboard on, which is really, really common, especially if you have that model that doesn't even have a power switch, right? And then what you can do, once you have this channel open, this man in the middle open, then you can sniff everything that goes by across them, determine things like, is authentication being used, because if you didn't configure your man in the middle with a link key, then you know it wasn't. Is encryption being used? You could even inject stuff with a few extra lines of code. So I'm going to do a little demo of this. What I'm going to do is, I have a keyboard here connected to my victim machine, which you can't see, but that doesn't matter. You just take my word for it that it's connected. And then I'm going to temporarily turn off Bluetooth on this little old PowerBook here. And so I'm sort of simulating turning off the computer. And now this keyboard's sitting here just waiting for somebody to connect to it. So I'm going to plug in 2 dongles to my attack machine. And this is the machine you want to be watching. If I can find, there we go. And I'm going to execute this little demo. The first thing it's going to do is configure one dongle to pretend to be the keyboard, configure the other dongle to pretend to be the host. And now it's trying to use the one that's pretending to be the host to connect to the keyboard, and it just made a connection. Connected to device such and such from such and such. Okay, so now we're connected to the keyboard and we're trying to initiate a connection to the host. But remember, the host Bluetooth adapter is down at the moment. So I'm going to, before I turn the host on, I want to start a HCI dump so that we have something to inspect after this whole process is over. So I'm just going to capture packets on the interface that is talking to the host. And now I'm going to turn the Bluetooth on the victim laptop here. And we should see in our other window, oh, there we go. Yeah, we got the connection to the host. We got the connection to the device. Then we got the connection to the host. And now we've got these packets going back and forth. And if I type something, you can see all those individual HID reports. And so now what I want to do is inspect what really happened by looking at this HCI dump. I'm going to, first thing I'm going to do is use T-Shark. You can use HCI dump, but T-Shark gives you some, or Wireshark gives you some more verbose output from these files. And I'm going to look for the word encryption. Encryption disabled, disabled, disabled. Encryption only for point-to-point packets. Happened in frame 17, which is early on in the connection, before any of those keystrokes went across. So this is a method you can use to verify that, yes, in fact, the host initiated encryption like it's supposed to. Sometimes you might find that a host doesn't initiate encryption. And it's pretty hard for you to know whether or not that's happening unless you use a tool like this to try it out. Another thing I want to show you is you can take, T-Shark will also allow you to convert an HCI dump file to a PCAP file. And then you can use BTAP. And sure enough, I typed something. And and actually all that other garbage up there, I believe, was from an earlier test I did in my hotel room in getting ready for this, because the HCI dump file was appended to. So note that BTAP can be used with raw baseband captures that we can get with GR Bluetooth and USRP, but it can also be used with HCI layer captures that we're getting with HCI dump. You have a question? Could you use this to differentiate between two different keyboards? The easiest way to differentiate between two different keyboards is by their Bluetooth device address. The actual characteristics of the report protocol don't vary a whole lot from keyboard to keyboard, although this keyboard is different than some. Like down at the bottom there, that 4347 is the computer asking the keyboard for a particular report that tells it its battery life. So what 37 in hex is actually, I think, the percentage. If you convert that to the decimal, I think that's percentage of battery life in this thing. And that's something that's unique to this particular model of keyboard. So there are some characteristics there, but generally you're going to differentiate devices just by their address. So let's get back to the slides. Back to my tips. Handy tips for secure operation of Bluetooth keyboards. Beware of boot mode. Make sure that you're actually using authentication. And make sure that you're actually using encryption. And the way that you can do that is by connecting to the devices, pretending to be each other, and seeing if encryption gets negotiated. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the Apple the Apple keyboard firmware attack that was implemented by or demonstrated by Kei Chen at Black Hat last year. Which I thought was pretty amazing. He was able to, he noticed that this Apple firmware update was going over a USB right to a keyboard, and that he was able to modify that firmware in the host computer before it ships over to the keyboard. And there was actually enough room in the non-volatile memory on that keyboard to be able to put some interesting payloads in there, like a keylogger that would record the first 100 keys that you typed every morning or something like that, and store it in the keyboard itself, where it's practically undetectable to anything running on the host operating system. Kind of scary stuff. And he pointed out that the firmware update process works basically the same for both the wired keyboard and the wireless keyboard, which runs on Bluetooth. So I said, well, hey, let's try it over Bluetooth. If I run a man in the middle, then I can find out some things about how this firmware update works. One thing I noticed before even running a man in the middle at all is that there are some extra PSMs, protocol service multiplexers, running on the keyboard. These are to L2 cap basically what a port number is to TCP. So think of these as ports. Port 1 is the service discovery protocol. That's expected. Ports 17 and 19, those are in hexadecimal. 17 and 19 are the HID control and interrupt channels, which together make one HID connection. So those first three are expected, but then those two high PSMs were unexpected. And I don't even know what one of them is for, but the last one is used for the firmware update, which I determined by just man-in-the-middling the thing. And the firmware update sequence looks something like this. It starts out with D1, D2, D4, D5, D6, D7, and then after all that negotiation, the host sends a whole lot of these D8 commands. The D8 commands have a length and an address and the data to write to the actual non-volatile memory on the keyboard, and thousands of these go by, and then it sends that DA0156, and that 56 is actually a simple checksum. So if you want to modify this, all you have to do, if you increment one of the bytes in, if you add 5 to one of the bytes of data, then you subtract 5 from that little checksum at the end. And then you get a little DB00 back from the keyboard that says, hey, I'm happy, I've got my new keyboard, and I'll reboot. And so I tried this out, and it works just fine. And just as an innocuous little test to make sure that it actually worked, I just modified a little string. It used to say Apple Inc. as a service provider on the bottom line there, but now my keyboard is, I believe, the only one on the planet that is produced by Banana Co. Hey. So yes, you can modify the firmware on these things. Yes, an attacker could, with knowledge of the device's address, connect to the device when there's an opportunity when the host is off, which is a pretty common situation, and blow malicious firmware onto the thing, just like Kei-Chen has shown. There's actually more non-volatile memory on these Bluetooth devices than there is on the wired models. So there's actually more potential for malicious payloads. And fortunately, this model, which is the 3-battery version that shipped a year ago-ish, or I think it started in 2007, it does require that the attacker have the link key. Yay. The newer 2-battery version is not so picky. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of skip through this, rapidly go through this pairing section because I put it at the end for a reason, because I thought I might want to skip through it quickly and get to some questions. But you guys should know that there have been attacks demonstrated on the pairing process. A passive observer can observe a pairing and very easily brute force the pin that was used to pair, and from that process derive the link key that's used by those two devices. It turns out that these tools, BT Crack by Thierry Zoller and BT Pin Crack by David Holton, and also they're using this method that's proposed by this paper by Wool and Shaked, and they require the full address of the master device, the full address of the slave device, and a bunch of other parameters that are observed in the clear during the pairing process. It turns out they make some assumptions that aren't necessarily true, and I'm going to skip through this a little bit, but if you want to find out about the realities of doing this, buy me a beer. And so in summary, beware of boot mode, make sure that your devices authenticate each other, make sure that they use encryption, and you should really only pair your devices in a Faraday cage. The HID profile says that it should provide a clear value-added security benefit to Bluetooth keyboards over existing wireless keyboards. Okay, and I thought I heard a little chuckle, but whoever was laughing probably hasn't looked at any other wireless keyboards, because I think they actually met this goal. I think these are way better than any other wireless keyboard that anybody's really looked at. But there's a lot of room for improvement, obviously. And in the future, a couple of things I want to note. One is that the one big tool that we don't have is a tool to do baseband injection. With the GR Bluetooth project, we can do baseband monitoring, but not baseband injection. If we had baseband injection, then you can pretty much ignore any advice that I might have for you. There are all sorts of attacks that become possible that would pretty much make any Bluetooth keyboard fall over, no matter how well it's implemented. So if you have a conservative security policy where you want to assume that your attacker has baseband injection, then there's really nothing you can do to protect anything that is following the HID specification. Another thing I want to mention for the future is the Bluetooth low energy specification, which is part of it has just been published and the rest is coming soon. It looks to me like it might be interesting to keyboard manufacturers, and it may be an opportunity to be, there probably will be a new HID profile written for it, I'm guessing, and that might be an opportunity to give us a wireless keyboard standard that we would all want. So big thanks, Josh Wright, Dominic Spill, Mike Kershaw, Kei-Chen. I couldn't have done it without all these guys. And slide links and code are up on that site, I think. If it's broken, let me know. Thanks, guys. And do we have time for a couple questions? Yes? Go.
So you're putting a lot of faith in people actually being near their computers for any time. A lot of the stuff can be ignored. You can directly attack if somebody goes on a coffee break or to the restroom or out on lunch in an office environment.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't mention that, but how much of a factor does that make it easier to just make this work?
The question, if I heard it right, is how much easier is this stuff, are these attacks, considering that people tend to get up from their computers for brief periods of time and go on a coffee break or something like that. I think there's a big opportunity for physical attacks. I mean, just being able to like go up to somebody's keyboard and look at their Bluetooth device address and walk away is a big win for an attacker. But from the over-the-air interface, you're not really going to get an opportunity as an attacker to get in unless one of those devices is actually turned off or moved out of range.
One more follow-up question.
Uh-huh.
If you plug in a dongle for a USB keyboard, but the person doesn't have a wireless Bluetooth keyboard, if they're typing on their normal keyboard, will those get repeated across?
Oh, the question was if somebody has a wired USB keyboard and also a dongle for a Bluetooth keyboard, but they don't even have a Bluetooth keyboard attached, right? They just have a dongle. Yeah, right. If an attacker just stuffed it in there, for example, do the HID events generated by the wired keyboard actually get repeated out over the air? And the answer is no. Oh, a question from the internet. Yes, excellent. Oh, that's kind of a broad question, but how happy are you with the USRP and what have you done with it? I love this thing. It's great. Matt Edis does wonderful work and produces some great hardware. I know it's a little pricey for a lot of hacker budgets, but it's an essential tool for anybody interested in delving into the baseband side of things. It's a really good product, and I would recommend it to anybody. The price is including a basic daughter board setup and everything you need to get going with this stuff is in the neighborhood of $1,000. So I'm actually really interested in working on developing like a lower cost alternative that would be capable of, say, sniffing just a single channel of Bluetooth, which is exactly what I was doing with the Kismet plugin. To find device addresses. And if people are interested in that kind of thing and maybe helping develop it, I'd love to talk to them. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to save your question for later, Rick. In this case, I'm using the Xceiver 2450, which is the 2.4/5 gig. But I've also used the 2400, the RFX 2400.
And all the USRP1,
The only thing that I've done with the USRP2 that I can't do with the USRP1 is all-channel monitoring. And the method that I use for all-channel monitoring, if you're interested in that, you can check out the video from my compound last year.